Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Modern Data Stack. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Hank Prybylski. I am the Global Vice Chair of Transformation at EY, where I look after our ecosystem on innovation, our own data strategy, and how we're transforming. So I'm really excited about this panel. I'll do some quick introductions, and then we're going to talk about the modern data stack, all the incredible value it's bringing to companies and customers, employees and experiences, and how it's integrating with each other, the value it brings, and looking to the future on some of the future innovations and business model changes. But let's get into it, and we're really blessed with some incredible CEOs. On my first direct left here is Matt Carroll, CEO of Immuta. On Matt's left, Rohit Choudhary, founder and CEO of Acceldata. On Rohit's left, Mohit Daswani, CFO of ThoughtSpot. And last but certainly not least, Raj Verma, CEO of SingleStore. So thank you for today. I'm going to kick it off. And one of the things we really wanted to start with is looking at what is the modern data stack and kind of how does it play with each other. So I thought maybe starting with you, Matt, kind of talk about Immuta, its role in the modern data stack. How do you define it? And all the different players and companies within that bringing value to the enterprises.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, the way I think of the modern data stack is really we're shifting from an application design paradigm where we would build thousands of applications in an enterprise based off of what users want to work on, right? So their specific use case, and they go through their workflows, and we're moving towards where any data could be available to any user, no matter where they are. And so that paradigm shift from application-centric to essentially any user on any data, has changed the way we have to think about the way we process that data, right? The second paradigm shift that we're seeing is this globalization of data, is that not only if any user is going to be on any data, then therefore those users could be anywhere in the world. So then that changes your thought process around how that data has to be made available, right? And so this has really thrust the world into data lakes, data warehouses, and modern data exchanges. And so when I think of the modern data stack, that's how I think of it is there's lakes to be able to amalgamate a series of different types of file formats. And then we have obviously our warehouse, which is traditionally SQL, so we can do things like business intelligence in an easy manner. And then of course we want to be able to share that data with anyone, right? Where we fit in that whole stack, right, is, well, just because any user can get on any data doesn't mean that they have the right to use that data, right? And so there are rules, right? Whether it's privacy policies like GDPR, whether it's contractual obligations, can I share this between one or many entities, right? Believe it or not, contracts and data really haven't changed since the 70s. We may want to think they have, but they haven't. So Immuta provides a layer of data privacy and access governance where we natively embed into Snowflake, Databricks, BigQuery, Redshift, et cetera, and we can then automate all of those policies. So 20 or 30 years at JP Morgan building rules into Teradata, we can instantaneously implement all those policies in real time in that compute environment and do that in a couple weeks. And so that's kind of what we've made a name for ourselves on. So yeah.
Thank you, Matt. And as a EY as a client of Immuta, and we operate in 170 countries, so we know how important it is to manage it.
My favorite customer.
So jumping over here, Rohit, why don't we talk about Acceldata and your views on the modern data stack and where you play?
Yeah, so I think, the modern data stack has sort of unbundled. If you went 25 years back or 30 years back, there was just one database. It was called Oracle. There were very few alternates, and if there were alternates, they were bought over within no time, the moment their market cap went above a certain limit. But what really changed is not the customer behavior. What really changed is, the amount of data that was getting generated in the world. And not just that, but along with the volume of data that was going up, the lack of structure. Now, you would have data which is, it belongs to the enterprise. That's inviolable, and that's basically the source of truth. But what's also happening is that, if that same customer information is being used by marketing or advertising, it's embellished in certain ways that includes, third-party data. You've bought some of that data, from anonymized data sources, and that lack of structure actually caused a lot of pressure. So if you just added these two things, what ended up happening was that the era of a single database ended, and the era of purpose-built, use case-specific databases started. And the kind of use cases that data is currently flowing through, I prefer to call it the supply chain of data, where data is undergoing a very complex journey. That journey has several points of origination and several points of consumption. And across that, you find streaming systems, OLAP systems, OLTP. And the reason that so much data is in demand is because consumers got used to next best action recommendation, and the enterprise is following it really quickly. Now, if you were today a data leader, you are basically responsible for three things. You're responsible for the selection of technology, the team, and the delivery of data to the business functions. And all of these are very, very difficult things because the supply chain of data can break at any point in time. So we essentially monitor that entire supply chain, monitoring the entire pipeline, monitoring different databases, monitoring what is the reliability and the veracity of the data, and should you trust that. So this whole new emerging category of technology is called data observability. You could also think of it as you had the network monitors, then you had infrastructure monitoring, then you had application monitoring, now you have data monitoring. So we are leading that category.
Excellent. So kind of going through the data stack, we've got Immuta, governance, privacy control, Acceldata, observability transformation, and now I think, Mohit, we're going to talk about ThoughtSpot, and kind of we'll talk about the analytics and the intelligence side.
Yeah. So looking at the market map that you've got up here, we would play on the right in the business intelligence layer. And ultimately, look, the volume of data is exploding. Now the infrastructure has moved of data moving from on-prem into the cloud. Ultimately, the goal is to unlock value from that data and create, whether it's using a buzzword of data-driven decision-making, but ultimately being able to help businesses both grow and manage costs through better use of their data. And even after all this shift, the friction that's still there is how do you take that data and make it both accessible and digestible by anyone within the enterprise, right? There still is friction around needing to know how to run data science tools or run SQL queries and others, which limits the population of people that can actually go create analytics sitting on all that data. And so ThoughtSpot's vision was to unlock that and allow anyone within the enterprise without any prior knowledge of SQL or data science or otherwise to get access to and ask questions of that data. And so it is, if you want to use a metaphor, it's sort of a Google for the enterprise, which is anyone can ask a question of their data, business data, structured data, not unstructured, and get the insights they're looking for. Very, very simple interface. It's live, it's interactive, it sits on your current version of your data, and so it's always up to date. And so that's where we play. I think stepping back, ultimately the exciting thing that is happening with so much of this now shift of data to the cloud, it is making it, I think, a lot more accessible. We are seeing that demand and interest now and kind of proof points of people saying, look, I want to be able to get access to that data when I'm deciding on my pricing or I'm measuring campaigns or other things, and I don't want to have to wait for it. I don't want to have to wait for the BI team to go and turn that around and come back and give me a few days later. So we're really unlocking that. And we sit across, we're agnostic as far as when you look at other parts of the stack, just tying it back to this. We sit on top of cloud data platforms, so we sit on top of all of them. So whether it's a Snowflake or an AWS, Google BigQuery, et cetera. And by the time the data is coming to us, it's gone through this process. It's already been ingested. It's been transformed through companies like dbt and others, and so it's kind of ready for analytics. So that's where we sit in terms of the modern data stack.
Thank you, Mohit. And maybe, Raj, just bring us home. Kind of, we talked about a little bit different parts of it, and we talked about SingleStore as being the data warehouse of the future. So maybe get your perspectives.
Yeah, I think SingleStore, the hope is that it becomes a verb one day. So when asked the question, what do you do with your data? The answer is we single store it, right? So whether it's transactions or analytics, but that's the vision that actually feeds in well to what does the modern data stack look like. I think the modern data stack today has too many boxes and lines, right? I'm not a VC, even though I might have dressed like one today, but so I don't have a portfolio to promote. I do think that the entire modern data stack has to be simplified and unified. And before we actually go into simplification and unification, I do think that the various elements of that data stack is the data integration box at the bottom, And on top of that is the data box, and then is the experience, which our friend Mohit here does a great job of. And you surround that with risk and governance, right? And then provide the network, and that's really what you need as the 5 components of a modern data stack, right? Today's, as I said, today's modern data stack, too many boxes, too many lines. It's a painting you wouldn't want to hang in your living room. It's just too complicated. And why are we talking about the modern data? I think, Rohit, you mentioned that. If you went to a bank 15 years ago in 2005 and said, how many databases do you use? The answer would be 1. And since Charles and Anna are here, it could be DB2, right? or Oracle. And, but the fact is, if it was 2, it was because the bank acquired another bank, so they had 2 different databases. Now you go to the same bank and say, how many databases do you use? The answer would be 87, and then we lost count. Because there are a lot of databases, a lot of technologies in each of our spheres, which are features masquerading as products, right? So really, the modern data, before we start managing modern data, let's put a definition to modern data. Modern data happened in 2008 when the smartphone and the social network started. It had velocity, variety, and volume, right? Which was unprecedented. So the incumbent databases could not manage the modern data, and they started putting swim lanes of technology to manage modern data. So essentially, where are we back to? To manage the complexity of modern data, we've created a complexity of technology sprawl, right? It's purpose-built technologies which are being used for every feature that you want. I'm not that great at math, but if you're using 10 applications or 10 databases to build an application, your points of failure are n squared minus 1. There are 99 points of failure. You cannot go into the modern world with an application that has 99 points of failure and data going in and out of those applications, right? And I'll probably end at least this question with, before we start solving for modern architectures and data, let's actually put who are we solving it for, right? As I joke with my friends, I'm on the back 9 of my life, right? And I'm a golfer, so golfing analogy, back 9 golf, right? However, the people coming onto the first tee or who are still on the driving range warming up to come up to the first tee, my kids, our nieces, nephews, or younger colleagues, they grew up in a very different world, all right? And for us to want to cater to them, and that being the what of what we are solving in the modern stack, then I think speed, flexibility, and user experience is something that the modern stack would have to demonstrate in spades. And by the way, all of that can only be demonstrated because you'll have to operate at scale, which we have never seen before. And the only thing that scales is simplicity. Complexity never scales. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I think, Raj, a great way to transition to our second question. So if we talk about the future, we know where we are today in the modern data stack, and we've got the interconnectivity and maybe the complexity of driving that at scale. We're looking at consumption models. We're looking at macro changes of the experience, right? Think about coming out of the pandemic. We're in a decision support, the future of digital twins, the future of experience-driven, and how is that going to be fueled by a data stack to continue that from speed, complexity, cost efficiency? So maybe I'll start back with the same order. Matt, if you start looking to the future of the data stack, where are we going and what are going to be if we're here at Montgomery Summit 2027, who are going to be the key winners of that technology and what did they drive from an innovation perspective?
Yeah, I mean, if you keep it kind of to the point, I mean, when you talk about the scale, I don't think people really grasp the scale that's coming. I remember, you talk about 2008, I talk about 2006 in Baghdad, where we were producing a petabyte of data per day, predominantly through drone operations, 270 megabits per second down, storing that video, overlaying it on maps in real time, right? And then the introduction of the Android and the iPhone, where you're flashing those for sensitive collection of data on terrorist targets. Move to today, it hasn't changed that much, to be honest. Move it 10 years from now on 5G, where we've got like customers like ours, like Daimler, John Deere, Cummins, I mean, they want to collect all telemetry across all assets to optimize their supply chain. We do not have that compute fabric to be able to process that at this scale. And then if you add in regulatory complexity, because every country is going to want to have oversight of their data, we're seeing that with China and South Korea, Japan, Australia, as well as Brazil, and these regulatory oversight of that data. Now you add in a different type of scale. It's not just the variety of data of how many users can get on what data, and the variety of those data sources. But now, like, as an example, I give you right now with Pfizer on a 2 billion entity data set, you have 96 million unique attributes across 180,000 users that could potentially query that. The combinatorial factors get into trillions of policies on it. So how do you compute that in real time? How do you compute fraud analytics, or, you know, my kid getting a PS5 in the back of my damn car, and, you know, they keep clicking buy if anyone has kids that buy stupid shit on there, but like it's like $99 over and over and over again. It's like, at what point are you going to shut the kid down? And so how do we automate those fraud analytics built in? It's a silly story, but that is the problem of the future, right? Is at scale, how do we operate on the edge? How do we handle trillions of unique little data sources, not big data, but little data sources, and compute them at you know, sub-second response times? And then how do we deal with the regulatory framework around that? Because now all of a sudden we're basically processing everyone's personal data everywhere.
Right.
So that's the scale. The people who figure out that scale are going to be the winners. And it's funny, I don't know how many people say we scale, because it's kind of a bullshit term. Everyone says they scale until they don't. And you know, I think the funny thing is the companies that you'll see they'll go global. They'll be on cloud infrastructure in every single country. And that's not just true the big three cloud. They'll have their own physical infrastructure on the edge, working with telcos. Those are going to be the breadwinners in this game.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. Maybe hit it over to you, Rohit.
Yeah, I mean, very similar thoughts. You know, some of our customers are generating close to a petabyte of data a month. Some are generating, you know, 2 petabytes of data a month. And when you actually put all of that in the context of the physical infrastructure that they have, whether on cloud or on premise, you know, the amount of compute that you really require is just tremendous. You know, again, going back, what was the paradigm so far? You know, single box, large boxes, beefy boxes, you're running SQL, you're getting the data. The challenge with that has now become that, you know, you now have to compute all of that because on several boxes in a distributed ecosystem, because all of that data cannot be stored physically on a single instance or a hardware block or box. And then what you end up finding is that, you know, for computing all of that data, you know, finding meaningful information, you know, and the worst part is that, you know, when you have a lot of data, you don't even know what you're looking at. You know, you're trying to find the insights that are hidden. As an example, you know, you're trying to find the disease pattern of how it's spreading in the US, or you're trying to find, you know, how many people are likely to buy a blue-colored Nike shoe 9 in a certain demography. Now, you don't know the questions when you start asking them. And when you end up computing that, you know, good luck, because the open source frameworks that you're using today, they don't have the maturity of, you know, the Oracle R&D or the DB2 R&D for the last 40 years. They were actually built in the last 5 to 10 years, and they will break. And when they break, you know, you find that, you know, all your expectations of providing the best experience, the best data interaction to all your users, that's going to break. So that provides, or that puts a massive challenge. The other 2 factors that are also going on is that unlike, you know, SDLC, software development lifecycle, there was a process that I would write code, there would be a friend of mine who would test it, and then we would release it to production. There's no concept of, you know, a data operations or a data development lifecycle. It's very early in the journey.
Right.
And the final thing, you know, on this is that, you know, please go, you know, there was like a time that I used to joke that throw a stone and it'll most likely land up on a Java developer. You know, go throw a stone, you won't find a data scientist or a data analyst. You know, it's the fastest growing category of job in the US, you know, data scientists and data analysts. So you don't have enough people, you have more complexity, and, you know, the frameworks are still evolving. So, you know, it's actually pretty challenging right now to deal with what's coming.
But the opportunity for the companies that get it right are massive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for us, you know, we are actually thriving on the kind of complexity that exists because, you know, our promise to all our enterprise customers is that, look, we're going to maintain the supply chain of your data accurate, reliable, so that you can use it whenever you need it.
I think it's certainly we're learning the world is so much more interconnected, and how does that data show that? Mohit, maybe take us a little bit to that future. Same question.
Yeah. So I didn't grow up in the data industry. I spent a lot of time in fintech before ThoughtSpot. And from an outside in, it's got to be one of the more confusing areas in software. I mean, There's religious wars between data warehouses and data lakes. We've had hype cycles around Hadoop and Cloudera and all of this. So I can't tell you where it's going to go from an infrastructure perspective. I have no idea. I think and it'll change. It'll change from where we are today. I think the basic parameters of it has to be able to scale efficiently. You have to have governance, you have to have security, and it has to be something that kind of meets the growing needs of business is going to be there in terms of headline parameters. From what we see, though, is the things that are undeniable are the volume of data obviously continues to explode. That's been something talked about here. I do think the combination of now a cloud infrastructure in whatever form it continues to evolve to, devices that allow you to interact with customers as well as collect data from customers, all again on an internet protocol, and then now an ability to apply into AI and machine learning, there's no doubt that the modern sort of data infrastructure is changing how business is done. You can't sit back anymore and just say one price for everybody. You can't sit back and say just one way to distribute your product. The world changes. COVID comes along. One of our customers, Nike, has to move from an in-store distribution to online. How do we do that in real time? So, and you're expected to be able to do that. Your customers demand that you can do that because that is the new expectation with all of this data that's available. So ultimately, to me, I don't know what the infrastructure is going to look like. But I do think that the way business is done, because of digital delivery, because of AI and machine learning, is going to make us a lot more intelligent. And I think the customer demands, whether it's consumer or enterprise, are only going to continue to increase because of that.
Excellent.
Yeah, Matt just made me feel so bad about myself. While he was in Baghdad killing terrorists, I was lying on my couch watching the Niners play, drinking beer. So it really made me feel bad right there. However, I do think that the modern data is an interesting bit. I do think that a lot of things have changed since 2006. And I think we are experiencing that without realizing what it takes to deliver that experience, right? If you take a ride-sharing company, right? So something that you all have done, all right? Unless some of us are that privileged that we have a chauffeur all day. It's just the fact that when you actually call a Uber or a Lyft or what have you, you are making a demand to their supply chain. They actually process how many drivers are in the vicinity that can get to you within 7 minutes. And then they take geospatial data about traffic and weather and compute how long that ride is going to be, match that to the pricing algorithm, and say, what pricing should it be? And all of that has to happen in seconds, right? So the perishable life of data is declining at the rate that we haven't seen before, right? Now, and then the driver comes and they monetize. I was at the Milken Summit across the road at the Beverly Hilton 2 weeks ago. There were 4,500 people there. And everyone was looking for a chauffeur, Uber or whatever, rideshare. Going a mile, we had to pay $35, which otherwise would have been a $6 ride. So what did they do? They took that data, they said there is a conference, they got the drivers to come to a vicinity of 2 miles of the Beverly Hilton every morning, and they monetized that opportunity that the previous taxi company could not monetize. That is operating at scale, it's operating at real time, right? Now, the one thing that people think that the minute you add a CEO title and you're at a data space, you can see around corners. I don't bloody know what's going to happen in the next 5 years about data. Yeah, sure, blockchain is a good bet to make. I think a couple of other flexibility, etc. But you can't base a company's strategy on things that are going to change. Those are bets, right? But there are a few things I know that will not change when we are sitting here in 2027. And no one's going to come to me and say, hey, Raj, can you ask your engineers to slow your database down? We don't need real time, right? So that's not going to happen. The second thing that is not going to happen is no one's going to say, hey, we want a rigid database which only operates in one place, right? No, they will want multi-cloud, they would want hybrid. No one's going to come and say, can you make your product harder to use? And no one's going to say, hey, can you limit the scale of your database? So those 4 tenets will never change for the next 5 years. And I think basing your strategy on that is probably a better bet than no matter how sure you are on an uncertain thing that we are all betting on. That's just my 2 cents.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to double click into a couple of detail areas, and I'm going to use EY's kind of frame as a reference. We got EY. We're in 170 countries. We're the only Big Four firm with a completely cloud-based activities. I think if you looked at it, we'd be a top 10 B2B exchange with information that flows into our area. And Rohit, I'm going to direct this at you. As we think about our data challenges, multiple countries, multiple silos, really is an area, how do we cross that information? So kind of moving beyond the siloed approach to data. How do you look at the data stack providing value that area?
Yeah, so I think, let me give you, so that's a great question, first of all, that, what's happening in the cloud. Let me also give you a reality check on, what's happening in the rest of the enterprise. So some of our customers, from left to right, mainframes, all the way to Azure Synapse or, Databricks. That's the sort of, 45-year history of data stores. So when you think about, putting all of these different data stores together, making it searchable, accessible, discoverable, and then eventually govern that and provide interactions which are at acceptable rates of performance, and the kind of things that people have started to expect, which is an instant click, get me all the information, just like the example Raj was giving. I think this is going to be a challenge for all customers, and it is only going to increase. There is only one way on this, that you have to start putting in practices. You have to start putting in some very, very thorough concepts of, how do we expect certain interactions to go, and there's got to be an expectation management as well within the enterprise. Some of our largest customers, they're telling us that we have to put or set the expectation because we won't be able to make all the data available instantaneously. Yep. So there's data that's going to reach you every morning at 7 a.m., but there's going to be data which is going to be available every second for you. And there's like 2 different taxonomies of that kind of data. And the more you define that for the rest of the org, the easier it becomes. Now that said, structures are very difficult. I think there's cloud data, there's, relational databases, distributed data stores. You have to manage all of that together. So having a really good idea of, what you have, understanding the landscape, and then sort of creating a taxonomy of what is the most important data. What's the inviolable source of truth? What's the first order derivative? And, what's the second order derivative? Because, you can keep going third, fourth, fifth, but that's not going to matter. So I think isolating these and making sure that those are always at a very high level of reliability is going to be super important.
Excellent. So that's some good practical ideas on the data challenge. I think as we talked about, we had a lot of view, and Mohit hit it. We want to democratize the data, empower the users of the data. We want to have data that's quicker, more connector, speed, but all is that built on a foundation of data governance. And data exists in different countries and different access rights of the owners of that data. And to be able to access that, to connect that, really requires an incredible governance structure. So maybe Matt can hit on that. How do you practically manage that governance issue? And maybe how is that changing in this compliance world?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at everything is time to data is king, right? So the faster I can get on data, the faster I can get value. Taking EY as an example, you have 255,000 clients, tax clients on your value-added tax platform. You have over 15,000 different users that need to get access to essentially the same type of data over and over and over and over again. And the client doesn't care how they do their job. They just want it done, right? And so the problem is with a lot of, as we globalize, right, all these countries have their own rules. And then we add in like data contracts, right? How do I write a data use agreement where I have hundreds of thousands of data sources where we have to manage all the rules of who can access what in there? Right. What's the conflict of interest, right? And so we have to really rethink the paradigm of governance. In the old ways, again, I go back to like the first thing I said here was we used to design applications and there were application workflows that would manage those rules. And then you would just serialize that. But in an era where we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of unique data sources, in an organization like EY, I mean, unless you want to hire a lot of lawyers, which you already do, but I doubt any of them can write code at scale, like you have to automate all of those rules, right? And so, what we see now is this separation of policy from core platform. You actually need a legal and governance framework that is separated from the core compute infrastructure. Our vision of where we're taking the company, it's not a sexy company, ours nor Cloudflare. Hopefully no one from Cloudflare's here. I think it's wonderful financial metrics though. But like, it's not sexy, but it's essentially they provide the backbone of web interface of how our websites are protected, we're kind of having to step in personally. The irony, I guess, coming out of the intelligence community, we're having to step in to be the global privacy kind of police, if you will. But like, is there has to be that separation of policy from all these core platforms to be able to enact contractual and regulatory oversight. Because as you said, data is going to be global. It's going to live everywhere. Contracts, data use agreements between all these different entities are going to get more complex because there's so many different types of data you want to share, right? And then third is that consumer privacy laws are starting to drive deeper and deeper into the roots of what we're doing, and it's constantly changing. So, yeah, I mean, obviously we have a small piece of that, but I think part of this modern data stack, that's going to be critical.
Right. Thank you. Maybe I'm going to go over and talk about this modern data stack for the large enterprise. So we're scaling, we're moving very quickly. And Raj, you hit earlier, what kind of use cases are you guys looking at to solve that data stack and kind of really lean in it? And maybe talk a little bit to the future of where we see business demand coming from.
Yeah, again, putting the customer or the consumer at the middle of that, right? So let's take something that we are all accustomed to. We all bank, right? So, and the way we banked 20 years ago to the way we bank today, very different, right? We went into branches and all the rest of it. And I think the way our kids are going to bank is going to be completely different. They would not want to speak to a human. I mean, I've got 4 kids, and none of the kids, I actually don't think my 17-year-old boy knows how to speak on the phone because, at least I don't have evidence of that. So they just want to get the information on their terms, consume that information, and get the hell out of there, right? Now, what does that mean for the enterprise? One of the large banks in America, we were talking to their C-suite, we got invited to their board meeting, and they said, we are actually not going to have any client relationship managers in the next 5 years. So we're going to truly become a digital bank, yeah? And so we said, all right, that's great. So you're going to have chatbots and all the rest of it? He said, yeah, chatbots are going to do 99% of it, and they're going to be intelligent. So really, from a modern data stack perspective, you need the analytics layer on top of which the bots sit because they are basically giving you the analysis of the data. And below that is the data layer. So from a modern stack, it's simple. Data stuff, analytical stuff, bot stuff. 3-layered architecture, we are done. All right. So where are they now, and where will they need to be, right? So what's the what, so as to speak? Today, if Mohit Daswani goes and buys a product from that bank, guess how long it takes them to find out who Mohit is? Is it an existing customer or a new customer? It takes them 6 days to find out. And by the way, their budget for IT runs into billions of dollars, right? When they go into the future state 5 years from now, where my daughter's banking with them, they would have to, the chatbot would need to know in milliseconds and seconds as to who Zoe Verma is. And not only is she a new customer or an old customer, what her next likely action is going to be, right? Yeah. So to get to that level, I come back to where we started, you will have to have speed, you will have to have simplicity, right? And you will have to clear out the museum of technologies that have gotten built in those banks and in those enterprises over the last decade or so.
Yeah, and think about that to the customer experience. Today, they don't even know if you're a customer. The future with the data stack is they want to know what your preferences are. And maybe we're working one startup who wants to hyper-personalize the offerings on an ESG basis. So really huge area. Mohit, going to get to you. We talk a lot about data being a technical area, but also kind of from a data-driven leadership. And how are you working with companies to really make that much more data from the inside?
So we had our customer and partner conference in Vegas a couple of weeks ago, and was chatting with one of our customers who was there, not a data person. She was in marketing, and she's at Verizon. And she said, your folks keep coming up to me and asking me what cloud platform are we on? Is our data on-prem? Is it in the cloud? She said, I have no idea. All I know is I used a product and it works. Yeah. And so if you ask me, that's where we've been successful, is you don't have to worry about all that. So I think in terms of making, any business is going to say, yes, we want to be more data-driven, right? It makes sense. The issue is there's all this friction in actually enabling that to happen. People get impatient. I can't wait 6 days for a customer who just walked in to offer them another product. They're gone. And so how do you take out all that friction? So if you're, when we work with companies, it's like, look, there are things that you just want to get done in the background. Take care of the basics, right? Pick the cloud platform that works. Remove all the friction in terms of data being available, et cetera. And this term self-serve and democratizing data, you mentioned, it's been used for a long time. People are tired of hearing about it. Can you deliver that? Which means someone who's an employee at a company, not sitting on the data team, sitting in any group, marketing or finance or what have you, actually can pull up their laptop and be able to go and say, yes, I want this information. Can they get it? That's the experience you want to deliver if you want data-driven decision-making. Yep. Because otherwise, if there's friction and I asked a question of my data and I got something completely different, or I have to wait 6 days, or I have no idea where to even start to get it, it's not going to happen, right? So it really is removing friction ultimately, I think, in how you deliver data to an everyday employee at your company that's going to enable that activity. I think the use cases are clear, right? How can data improve top-line growth, revenue growth? In a world in which we exist today, which everything is measurable, I think that's quite clear, right? One of our customers is Hulu. Hey, I'm a consumer. I have a phone. I have access to any platform I want for digital content, right? YouTube, Netflix, Hulu. We don't need to tell Hulu that. They know that. So they're like, how do we make it stickier so you're binge watching on us rather than someone else? So they, their program managers look at when they add a new program or they change features, how does that change user retention and engagement on their platform? That's data-driven decision-making, and they need to do that in such a competitive environment in which they exist today, which is digital streaming. So we don't have to convince people of the value of data-driven. I think it's really take all the friction out, all the things that are being discussed about here, governance and security, everything else, so you can make it accessible to anyone, and then make it easy to use. And so that's been sort of our philosophy. So I'm obviously preaching, from our own hymn book here. But I think ultimately that's it. I don't think there's any convincing that there's value in data, that you can grow your business, or you can better control costs, or you can better plan for risks in your business with better access to data. Just try to unlock it, make it available.
Awesome. Thank you. One of the things we talked a lot about kind of as we were prepping for this panel was the future. And kind of the future of I'll call it the consumption model in general. We went from, I think Mohit just hit it, data is an invaluable asset of every company. Do you think of it as a capital asset? Do you invest in to create operating leverage? But we're also in a world today where as-a-service models are increasingly in vogue for every asset. We were talking about the Uber. And how do we think about the modern data stack on pricing models and interconnectivity within the pricing models to incentivize growth? So maybe throw it out to the group, and I know maybe people have perspective views on that. Where we are today, how is it going to change, and how to create scaling around that?
Everyone's looking at me. All right, fine. I'll go with it. And I do think that the consumption-based model, in theory at least, is great. I pay for what I use, and I don't pay for what I don't use. And what were we actually solving for, having been around in the enterprise software for multiple decades now? It's just that we would go sell a lot of software which resided on the shelf, right? And that's what the CIOs and the CFOs did not like. And they were sort of, I'm okay spending more, but I want to consume what I spend, right? So, or what I buy. So that's great. However, unfettered use of a technology by people who are not adding value to reasoning with that data is just cost with no result, right? So people who should be reasoning with that data should be allowed to reason with that data, because that makes the client experience better, the organization better, saves cost, improves experience, etc. So I'm all for that. And I think what Rohit's company does, being able to observe what the cost is for a query or for a move, is an essential element of that consumption-based pricing. Because one of the theories that I have, we compete with Snowflake. You might have heard of those guys. Snowflake, is it? One of those two. I always get confused with that name. Now, the fact really is, you can actually query Snowflake from anywhere you are, right, as a user, if the enterprise has that. Imagine if you were paying for every query or every time you Googled something 5 cents. How often would you allow your kids and your family to Google? Not very often, at least not as often as you would want, right? And I do think that being able to have the consumption-based pricing for all the good reasons, you pay for what you consume, but then not having the astronomical bills which CFOs like Mohit hate, because people who have no reason to reason with data are reasoning with data. So I think that's a balance which will happen.
Yep.
But I do think that there are certain models, especially Snowflake, which is not coming up with shining marks on the consumption model. And we do start to get questions from investor community now that it's all right, you're a consumption-based model, but how do we ensure that that's not excessive?
Okay. Yeah, I think we're still learning how this is going to play out, right? I think it's quite interesting that it's happening, which is it happened in our consumer life, right? When the iPod came along, instead of having to buy a whole CD of 2 songs you wanted and 10 you didn't for $20, now you could buy the song you wanted for $1. And it was the combination of digital distribution and a device, and Apple going and beating up the media companies saying, if you want to sell on our platform, this is what you're going to do. And so that changed the pricing paradigm in our consumer lives, and it's continued. I think it's interesting in that we're seeing that now in the enterprise with software, and this notion of, yes, pay for where you get value. Don't have shelfware where you have 1,000 licenses and 10 people use it, right, and the others don't. So it is putting, I think, pressure on all of us in the software business to say we need to deliver value. And I think that's a good thing overall, right? I think it allows enterprise customers to say, I'll pay for where I get value, I'll pay for usage. If we have a consumption pricing model as part of our offering, and as long as your employees are using it and asking questions of their data, they're getting value, you should be happy to pay for that. It's a good relationship. I do think, though, the part where I think we're going to learn still, and you're starting to see up in the public company narrative for Snowflake and others, is, well, where are the limits on it? Right, 160% NRR for Snowflake, fantastic as it relates to them or any of the other cloud providers. But where do enterprise customers say, hey, at some point here, I need visibility, I need controls on my spend, and I need caps or otherwise. So I think we're going to learn, especially now in this environment where IT budgets probably come under pressure, how that evolves. So TBD. But I think overall it's healthy. I think it's healthy, and I think it's part of a learned behavior, which is I only want to pay where I get value.
If I was borrowing at 2.7% for a home mortgage, and if I was getting 20% on equities year on year, nobody would complain. So the real thing is, are you getting that 20% outcome on your data, or on the cost that you're paying to the cloud? And I think that's the real question. So if your business model is such that you are able to generate value out of your data, which is 5 or 10 times greater than the cost that you pay, then I don't think anybody's going to even blink their eye. If you ask Disney and Hulu and any of these companies, do you mind the cloud cost? No, they don't. If you look at Datadog's investment into cloud for the last several years, the speed or the time to market actually trumps everything. Eventually, companies like Box moved away from the cloud and developed their own storage system. So it depends upon what's your eventual business model. But in the interim, what is also going to happen? So that's basically about the model. But what's really going on, to Raj's earlier point, is that there are 2 levels. One is that the usage or the consumption pricing that you're paying for, but the second layer of that is the stupidity that you're also paying for. And where a lot of elements of governance come in, which is, did you run the query on the same data set to produce the same data set 20 times a day? Why couldn't you just use the data that was produced by one of your colleagues who just created that data set? Couldn't have you just used that? So I think a lot of these inefficiencies are getting built as customers transfer not just their data, but their behaviors from their past systems.
So kind of reconciling the consumption model with the ROI with the behavior model, you'll find the right path to optimization. We've got about 1 minute left. I want to give quick, rapid fire, some incredible thoughts, but maybe if you're going to leave the group here, who's been great listening to our ears, some final words on where the modern data stack is going. Matt.
I think we covered like everything.
Yeah.
My only parting word, selfishly, is if you don't know why you're collecting data in your organization, you should probably figure that out. Because the future of the way the modern data stack will be built, whether it's cost consolidation, whether it's regulatory oversight, but it's like, why are you creating more data in your organization, and having good reasons around that? I think that's going to be really, really important as you move forward.
Awesome. Rohit.
Data systems are just like toddlers. You don't leave them alone. So don't leave your data systems alone. Just keep watching them as long as they're operating.
Good advice. I think you met my data team. Mohit.
Yeah, Apple changed its settings on the Apple phone to be able to change your privacy settings.
Yep.
And say which apps can monitor your usage across different apps. I think we've seen that in the consumer world. But I think we're on the front end of data being ubiquitous and everywhere and available, tracking everything. That sort of social responsible management of data is going to be key. And I think if a company isn't thinking about that, they should before it becomes an issue for you. So I think being proactive and thoughtful about how we have this incredible power with data, how do we use it in a way that's beneficial to folks, is probably a good skill set to be building.
Thank you. And Raj, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, thanks. I do think that the future, if you think the future is fast, or sorry, the current environment requires speed and scale, we have no idea what's coming at us with Web 3.0 and the metaverse and all the rest of it. So I do think that real time will have a very different meaning to what real time means right now. You're going to measure real time in milliseconds and not in minutes. And for that, you would need speed and scale. So that's really what the future holds for all of us.
And in the truest meaning of real time, we're really out of time. So I'm going to thank my panelists here, Matthew, Rohit, Mohit, and Raj. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know everybody did today, so thank you. And we're really excited about the future of the modern data stack. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank.